a lot of times it's going from really, really good to just a little bit better than really, really good, right? So it's a small stuff. And I think we have to be open to different ideas because that's how you take a kid from very good to great.
Welcome to the Cutting Edge Coaching Podcast, where we believe coaches are some of the most important teachers and leaders in the world, and they deserve to be supported. I'm your host, Luke Gromer, and every week we're bringing you conversations with coaches, experts, and leaders from across sports that will give you practical ideas and strategies that you can apply in your coaching to develop high-performing teams and high-character people. Coaches, I'm excited to welcome Kristin Bernthal Booth to the podcast. Coach Booth is the head women's volleyball coach at Creighton University. She's served as the head coach for the program for the last 20 years, which you'll hear more about in our conversation. She's been the National Coach of the Year 3 times, and she's amassed over 400 wins at Creighton, in addition to multiple deep tournament runs and an impressive stretch of 8 straight conference titles. In this conversation, we dive into keys to sustaining success, her evolution as a coach, family life balance, and motivating and connecting with players. As always, if you'd like the free podcast notes in this episode, go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast or click the link in the show details to download a free PDF of notes from this episode of the podcast or any episode of the podcast. Now to my conversation with Coach Booth. Enjoy the episode. Coaches, really excited to welcome Coach Booth to the podcast today. Coach Booth is the head women's volleyball coach at Creighton University. Coach Booth, thanks for taking the time to talk to me today.
Oh, it's an honor to be here.
Coach Booth, I want to start off and talk about some of the keys to the sustained success that you have had at Creighton. I believe you just finished your 20th year there. Is that correct?
Yeah, you're aging me quickly. We have to lead with that.
Well, but I mentioned it because, I mean, that's just not that common in the coaching profession, and especially now. And so I saw that number. I was like, wow. I mean, that's awesome. That in and of itself is such an amazing accomplishment. But I just want to read off some of your highlights. So you're the all-time wins leader there. You have 414. You've reached 11 out of the last 12 NCAA tournaments, including 2016, the Elite Eight, Sweet 16 trips in 2015 and 2016. And this blew my mind. 8 straight Big East regular season titles. That's quite the list over the past 20 years. And so I would love if you would just start off and share, in your opinion, or as you reflect on all that success, what have some of the keys been to sustaining such a high level of success at your program?
Well, I don't think I always say it's not a magic wand, right? I think it's consistency. You know, I often say I don't do a lot of things well, but I hire well. I've sustained great assistant coaches. I've had one that's been with me the whole time. I always consider her kind of the rock of the program. And then I've had some different assistants that have come in that have all been fortunately outstanding and brought different talents to give us new ideas and kind of change the program and help us. But honestly, I think it gets overlooked, but we work hard every day. You know, I think we actually have good life balance. Actually all of myself and my 2 assistants have children. And I always say, I want us to be great coaches and great parents. So I don't think it's that, I think we work hard, but we're also not wasting time. We try to make sure we're prepared for everything that we do. So again, it seems like 101, but we'd never arrive to a practice without a good practice plan that we've talked about. We'd never go on a trip and not have our itinerary put together and our meals ordered and a plan for everything. Now, sometimes things happen. You have to be able to adjust. We're going to prepare for every team, regardless if they're number 1 in the country or number 300th in the country. We're going to make sure our players approach every match with an urgency to play their best. So it's not always perfect, but I think the big thing is, I think I hear of people that work hard. Maybe they'll work hard for a recruiting season and then they'll take a month off. That's just probably not going to happen. I mean, unless it's a vacation for a week or something like that. When we come into the office, we work hard and I think that's probably the biggest thing. And then I think we've got something that we really believe in here at Creighton. And so it's easy to try to sell that to recruits. We don't get every recruit that we want, but I think it'd be hard to be at a school that you didn't really believe in. And I really believe in the institution and the program that we have and the young women we have in the program. So that part's pretty easy for us to sell.
That's really good. I want to talk more about having good life balance that you mentioned, but before we do that, I was this thought just kind of popped into my head, and maybe it's a big one, there's just a few things that come to your mind, but I was just curious. Like you said, you've been there 20 years. When you reflect on your time there, what are some of the ways that you feel like you have maybe major ways that you've grown or changed in the last 20 years? When you think about year 1 at this job and now year 20, how have you changed and evolved?
A lot. I think, when I took the job, I was 27. I wasn't all that confident. I think I was a confident human, but like as far as coach, I didn't like. I still don't. Probably my Achilles heel is I don't like people not to like me, right? And as a coach, we inevitably have people that sometimes don't like us, or at least disappointed in decisions we make, and that's always been hard. But a huge transformation for me, I think, over the years is the ability to have direct, sometimes tough conversations, to try to head those things off before they become confrontations and difficult conversations. So, and maybe at points they are difficult, but, for instance, a player comes in and they don't have a good attitude at practice. I think when I was a younger coach, I might let that happen for a week and start talking to the assistants. What's wrong with this girl? Why is she acting this way? And get upset. And now, within 20 minutes, if a player's struggling, and I'm going to approach them with compassion, I'd say, hey, you're not yourself today. Is something going on? Because the expectation in our gym is that you're going to come in and be locked in and ready to go every day. So if that pivots, there's probably something going on. And so, and again, that leads to relationships of me caring about them prior to yelling. So communication, and that can be someone makes a mistake, or maybe someone has a problem, or you hear, maybe they've made some decisions off the court. Just being confident enough to bring them in, have the conversation, and then, decide what the accountability on it is going to be and moving on. I think other ways, the game, I think every sport, right, in the last 20 years is going to evolve, and 20 years from now, it's going to be different. So, if you were to dive into skill stuff, there's definitely changes that I've made from a training standpoint. I definitely am a coach that thinks there's lots of right ways to skin a cat. So I love getting new people in the gym and saying, how do you teach this? And, so I'm definitely a coach that's open to different ideas and trying things. And I think when you're working with really high level athletes, something that a lot of times it's going from really, really good to just a little bit better than really, really good. Right. So it's a small stuff. And I think we have to be open to different ideas, because that's how you take a kid from very good to great. So training stuff. But yeah, tons of changes over the years. I remember when I had my first child, I started in 2003 and I had my first daughter in 2005. Can't even remember the years. And my AD said to me, "You're going to be a better coach now that you're a parent." And it took me a little while, but now that my oldest is 17, I see that now. I think you approach things differently when you're a parent as a coach sometimes, because you want to treat every athlete as you'd hope your daughter or son would be treated.
That's so good. Yeah, I have a 4-year-old boy and a 15-month-old boy. And yeah, it does. It changes how you see other people's kids. And then, like you said, you're like, man, I hope, how do I want my kid to be treated by their
Right.
coach at some point down the road?
I think the other big thing of being a parent is inevitably your kids are going to go through rough time. At some point, your son's going to land on the bench, or a coach is going to get on him or get beat out. That's probably the bigger one that happens. And I think now I can empathize. I still know that if my kid gets benched, I know how I'm supposed to respond. I think I do that pretty well. I support my kid. I'm not going to go yell at the coaches, all those things that we know. but I understand the pain that parents feel. Like you ache for your kids, but we got to push them through. We got to let them go through that failure and hopefully come out resilient on the back end.
That's really good. Well, let's talk about what you mentioned earlier. You said as a staff, one of the things you're proud of is that you guys have good life balance. Uh, yeah, will you talk more about that? Because I think that's an area that can be hard for a lot of coaches to turn it off and be present with
Yeah.
your family and still be the kind of husband or wife or parent you want to be to your kids. Will you talk about how you individually and or your staff together, how you guys try to do that well?
Well, it's not perfect. So, I mean, I want to make sure that when I talk to young parents, I'm always like, I had and still do sometimes have the mom guilt, and it's a journey. Um, but some big things that we've tried to do within our staff is, if we're in town and there's something big going on with our kid, go be there, right? So if that's a school concert, this is a job that we're working a lot of nights and weekends. So if a concert's at 10 a.m. during the school day, absolutely go do that. So cultivating that environment. If we need to leave practice early a little bit, sometimes for something occasional, but I've never had an assistant that's abused that. So I trust that if they say, hey, this one's a big deal, absolutely go be with the kiddo. My kid's sick, I can work from home. I think my assistant that's been here for 20 years lives an hour away. So if she's got an issue with the kid, a lot of times she's staying at home, but I just know she works hard. So with that said, I always want to hire people that, you talk about turning it off. My comment to my staff is I want them always dreaming about how Creighton volleyball can be great. So I don't know if we ever can turn it off. I think sometimes we have to put it away, but maybe they go into bed and they're percolating on this big recruit that we're going to get, and they're coming up with a new idea of something we can do to entice that young woman to come to Creighton. So I want to be surrounded with people that are always thinking about how we can be better. And I've been fortunate to have a lot of people like that. So it is a balance. I don't know if it's turned off, but I want them to definitely feel comfortable to say, hey, this is important. I really want to do this. And I want to make sure that I'm always supportive of them doing that, because if they're not, this is the big thing I think sometimes college coaches miss. If we are not role modeling in high school too, if we're not role modeling to our athletes, being a good parent, we're not doing all that we need to do in developing them, because they need to see us do these, be family people. At least that's important to me. I want the young women in our team to see, I want to be a great coach, but I want to be a great mother, because a lot of them are going to be professionals and also have a family.
Yeah, that's really good stuff. And I appreciate, you talking about, you make it a priority to be at things that are important for your kids and trusting each other to do that well. And yeah, I totally agree. I think that's so important. But it can, like you said, it's a hard thing when your job consists of nights and weekends. And yeah, it's a demanding job. And it's a demanding job, emotionally too, and
Yeah.
relationally. Like there's times when I get home after a practice or a game and I feel like I don't have anything left relationally to
Mhm.
give my kids or
Mhm.
my wife, because there's so much of that being done with your team and those players. And so, yeah, it's hard. It is hard. I don't know. Like you said, I don't think there's a perfect system for it, but you got to be intentional with it.
Yeah.
Uh, you've talked about your assistant coaches some. Talk to me about your thoughts on how to handle disagreements between head coaches and assistant coaches in a healthy way.
Mhm. Well, it's hard. I think these are real things that, and it's a balance. Like, you want to hire people that are going to challenge you, right? You don't want just someone that's going to say yes to whatever you want, whatever you say. So, you know, I think in our assistant roles, you have to think about, do you have some, like in my case, we actually have two assistants and we're actually hiring a third. And we actually were discussing today of dynamics that we need. Like, how many strong personalities do we have on staff? Okay, so let's talk about, do we need another strong personality, or do we need someone that's going to be a little bit more laid back? So I think those things are important. As if I have confrontation with an assistant, it's kind of how I try to approach players. I even if I think it's not right. Like maybe they're coming in and they're fighting for something that I totally disagree with. I really work hard to listen and not get defensive. And I'm not always perfect about this. I don't mean to sound, I could see some of my assistants be like, wait, she is not that way. But I really try to be intentional on listening and being receptive and thinking through, giving it time. So, I try to make sure that I'm listening to them. And then if I am going to disagree, giving them reasons. I think the other big thing as a leader in any, if you're managing people, is sometimes their path to a destination and my path may be different, but either of them are fine, right? We could go this direction or this direction. We're still going to probably get where we need to go. So I think a really important thing is don't take every battle. So if they say, I think this pregame meal is going to be better, it's, okay, do it. Right. Like now there's going to be some big things that are important, or it could be a drill and a practice. Like, so I think we have to be really, I think if you talk to most of my assistants, they feel like they're part of our program. It's not just them implementing what I want them to do. They are really, truly leading this ship with me. So at some points you have to give them the reins. But I will say, over the years, I've had different personalities as assistants and definitely had conflict. I think I've always had good humans. So even if maybe we're mad at each other in that 20-minute period, but when we walk into the gym, I actually have never had an instance that I've ever felt like an assistant has undermined me to the players, which is a pretty big statement in 20 years and really, really important. That would be a deal breaker for me. If I felt like they were, saying stuff to the players, Booth doesn't know what she's talking about. That would be a pretty quick, hey, we can't do this any longer.
Yeah, totally. I think that is the deal breaker for sure. You can have some disagreements, but when you're in front of those kids, you got to be on the same page, or at a minimum, not undermining
Yeah.
like that. Yeah, that's really good stuff. Another topic I know you've shared some thoughts on that I thought was really interesting, and I wanted to pick your brain on, is motivation and motivating players, and in fact motivating with extrinsic reward, right? I think we all want intrinsically motivated players, but tell me about your thoughts and maybe even some examples of how you guys use some extrinsic motivation or rewards in your program.
Well, we started years ago. If we go undefeated on a road weekend, we get ice cream. And so that kind of morphed to, it probably started with Angie and I like ice cream. And so we'd had a good weekend and we were like, let's go get ice cream. And then a lot of times traditions don't come out of like a lot of forethought. Right. So now it's really become a very big, hey, if we go undefeated, we get ice cream. And if we've had times that like we've had a flight, so we haven't been able to get it. And then they're like, Booth, you owe us ice cream. And so we'll get ice cream. So, do I think that determines whether we win or lose? No, I sure hope not. But it is a fun carrot that they have that they will talk about. So, I think, as far as motivation, I think the bigger nugget is how do you make them want to be great instead of us wanting them to be great? And I think that's a big line, so I always say the fear or love, you can lead out of fear, or you can lead out of love. And my goal, and again, it doesn't always happen, but my goal is I can get the players so on board that they want to be great, that they're going to do everything in their power on and off the court. That means sleeping, nutrition, partying, meaning not partying, coming into the gym and working hard, lifting, all the pieces that we know are going to make us great, that they want it so bad, that they love it so much that they are going to bust through the wall. So that's one way to lead. That's the way I try to lead. And then you've got the another successful model is they're scared out of their minds, right? Coach is I'm going to have to run. I'm going to be in trouble. Whatever the case is, I'm going to do these things at a high level because I'm scared a little bit. So both of those things, and I think they can cohabitate every once in a while. But I think that's the really key to being a great coach or a great teacher or a great leader, of how do you get people to want to be their best and really enjoy it? I think we get the most out of people for the long term. You can get the most out of people in fear in a short while, but how do you sustain it for a long time? I think it's getting them to buy in and love it.
That's so good. Yeah, I love that. Just talking about that goal is that you want them so on board that they're going to do everything they can to be at their best. Will you talk more about that? Like, how do you and or your staff try to get them to that place or uncover that in them, that desire for them to want to be great?
Yeah. Well, we talk about it a lot with them. So, let's even start at the beginning a little bit of a year, which a year for us may start in January, right? Because we're going to play, our main season starts in August, but we're prepping for that year. But we'll talk to the team about, what are their goals. So they might have some outcome based goals. We want to do this in the NCAA tournament. We want to do this in the Big East, so on and so forth. And then where we spend most of our time is, okay, what has to happen for us to get there? Okay, so they dive into the weeds. Well, we have to go to class. We have to get 8 hours of sleep a night. We need to stay hydrated. All the things that they have enough knowledge because we give this information to them constantly. We have to make sure the gym is at a high level every single day. We have to hold each other accountable to that. All those things. So they make a big list of the things. So now they have ownership of what we need to do. So then part of our job is to remind them of those things and then hold them accountable. But I think if you see in the gym, if you came to our gym in a day that it wasn't like the intensity wasn't high, I've learned, I tried to be a yeller when I was a young coach and I just don't do that well. So, they joke that my alums will come back and say like, you would mom guilt us. So like, I might bring them in and be like, ladies, are we doing what we want to do? Like, are we playing at the level that we can play at to reach these goals that you guys have set? And, again, we've got great kids in our program that are like, nope, let's raise the level. And then, we'll do some punitive things like the ball drops, like instead of yelling, because again, that's not natural for me, they might run to the wall and back. So it's quick stuff. It's kind of a reset, but there's accountability in the gym. But I think that's an area that I'm not, of all things, like I still think I can be a little bit more accountable. I get that feedback sometimes from the players, like, there's sometimes inconsistency on my accountability. So I've got to continue to work on that. But I think the big thing with those things is talking about it a lot. If you set goals, you can't just do it once. They're going to forget about it, right? If they need to eat well, you can't just say, hey, let's eat well this fall. You gotta create that culture on a daily or weekly basis that you're reminding them of the things. Make sure you get sleep. Make sure you guys make good decisions this weekend because we have goals that we're trying to reach. So it's just continued communication, I think, for us.
That's really good. Yeah, and I appreciate what you said too. It's lots of reminding them about those things, and I love that you're allowing them to speak into it. Hey, where do you guys want to go? How can we get there? And then, like you said, it's a lot of reminding them about this consistently, holding them accountable to it. When they're not meeting that standard, hey, this is where you wanted to go. How do we get back to that trajectory that's going to try to take us there? Will you talk now? Because I think it's connected to some of what we've been talking about with really wanting to help our players desire to be great, and which I think builds that intrinsic motivation and desire, and then drives the behaviors. And I think a big piece of it too is the connections that we have with players. You talked about like you're trying to lead and motivate out of love. Will you talk about? I know you've referred to as outside the box ways to connect with players, or just ways that you and or your staff try to intentionally connect with your players.
Yeah, some people are way more methodical about this. There's I think things that I've heard people do that we've never done is, you put them maybe into 3 or 4 groups and, you're going to meet with, so every 4 weeks you're meeting with everyone individually. I think individual meetings, communication are good things to do, or going to get coffee. All those things are going to be good. I think the more we can interact one-on-one with the players is good. Some things that I've done that are small, but I do think are impactful is, like if the team is stretching, going around. And for me, a lot of times it was physical contact. Like maybe I put my hand on their shoulder. How are you today? Anything go on? And try to make a physical contact with every single player. And that's something that I'm not perfect about, but I am pretty good about trying to connect with every single player. We corner up before practice, not a big deal, but like it's probably a time waster. And I think some players over the years have been frustrated with it, but we probably waste 5 to 7 minutes at the start of practice. And I usually have an agenda, but a lot of it's just shooting it a little bit. What went on today? Anyone have anything fun going on? When we come back from any sort of break, we will go through and ask for highlights, so it's small stuff. I think, I know at the high school level, you have to be careful about this, but we can text players. So, if a kid has a great practice or seemed a little off or, things along those lines, just trying to make sure that you connect with them, even through social channels. And I know it's a little different, and I think you have to be careful of that, especially if, maybe, or you could include multiple coaches on that. Like, hey, you had a great practice today, or, and then being cognizant of if a kid is struggling. I think of all the things where I've really connected with kids is that when they have something go on in their life, I always want them to know that I'm here for them. Volleyball becomes very secondary. And I think if you talk to the alums in this program, a lot of times they'll lead with, she cared about us more as a person than a volleyball player. And that's probably the biggest compliment I can get, because I always want them to know that. And then you got to be on top of it and follow up. So maybe something's gone on. And so you have to make sure. And sometimes I'll even write notes, follow up with so-and-so, because maybe they broke up with, a partner or something, and it's been traumatic. We know those things are hard, right? So in 2 or 3 days, I want to make sure I touch base and say, hey, how are you doing? I know that was pretty tough. And I think those things go a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's so important. And just, I appreciate your willingness to recognize, sometimes life happens and things happen, and it does impact the way that they show up in the gym or in a game. And as much as we'd like them to be able to leave everything, I mean, like, sometimes that's really hard. Sometimes it's hard
Mhm.
for me as a coach too. Like,
Yeah,
I've got stuff going on, like my wife and I had a conflict or whatever, and then you bring that with you to work and you're frustrated and it changes how you react. And it's like, we just got to remember that the athletes that we coach, they're humans too. And that they have lives that impact them and situations and
absolutely.
relationships. And so I appreciate the empathy that you shared there, and recognizing that, it's a real part of this dynamic.
And I think when we get to a really good level, and I've had players that have done this and other players that don't, but is when they come and tell you before practice, right? Hey, I failed a test, or I'm really stressed about class, or my mom and I got in a fight, or, pick your poison of what the issue is that may seem like small things to us, but they're big things in the moment. Or, I lost my dad a year and a half ago. So,
Hmm.
I was going through some stuff, and being vulnerable to the team of like, you guys, like, it's a rough time for me. So if I'm a little off, I just want you to know. And I think they see us as humans, right? So some vulnerability that we're not perfect too, right?
Hmm.
I think goes a long way on their humanity to remember, okay, they're more than just coaches. They're spouses and moms and dads and all those different things.
That's really good. Well, Coach Booth, this has been awesome. You shared a ton of valuable insights with the listeners. Before we wrap it up, I'd love to ask you actually 3 rapid fire questions.
Uh-oh,
The
I'm bad at
first
this.
one is, and I just tell me the first thing that comes to your mind. The first one is this: the most fun part of coaching is.
Relationships.
That's good. The second one: I wish I would have known blank about coaching before my first coaching experience.
How hard it would be.
Will you say more about that?
Oh, I think it looks very glamorous from the outside, but every every season there's always ups and downs. It's a job that you're going to disappoint people, and it's emotionally taxing. And sometimes the decisions aren't clear and you're trying to do your best. And it's hard. And I think sometimes we make it look easy on the outside, and it's not. And there's a lot of challenges with it.
Yeah, that's good. Last one. I know I'm successful as a coach when...
I want to say when we win, but I know that's not what I'm supposed to say.
I mean, it's a piece of it. It's okay to be honest.
I think, when I'm successful is when they still love the game when they're done. Because I think a lot of times winning is a part of that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fun
to win.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I mean, I appreciate that answer because you're coaching high level athletes at the college level. And for many of them, like this is their last experience playing, I'm sure. Even in your program, I'm sure some continue to play, some it's probably it.
Yep.
And for most of them, they've invested crazy amounts of their life and time into this sport, and they're coming to the end of it. And like, I'm sure, like we both know how many kids burn out before they ever even get to that college point. And then they're doing it at the college level, which is so demanding. And if an athlete leaves your program after a few years and they still love the game, well, yeah, I think that you probably did something pretty special and right if they made it through that high level and they still love it.
I agree.
Yeah, that's really good. Well, Coach Booth, this has been awesome. I appreciate you taking the time to share with the listeners today. Before we hop off, just share with the listeners where they can connect with you on social media or anything like that.
Oh goodness. I think I'm Coach Booth on Twitter. That's probably my biggest platform. And then I think I'm Coach Booth on Instagram or something like that. I'm not great. I'm on Twitter the most, but yeah, I wasn't ready for that. I should follow Creighton Volleyball. That's what I would say.
Yeah, there we go. Awesome. Well, Coach Booth, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks so much, Luke.
Coaches, thanks for listening to this episode, and a huge thanks to Coach Booth for joining me. You can find links to connect with her in the show details. And don't forget to check out the show details if you'd like the free podcast notes or to learn more about how we serve coaches. Thanks for listening to the podcast. We'll see you next week.